And so I'd like to take 2 or 3 more questions, but now all of a sudden the hands have gone up. I was very quiet at the beginning. There was a gentleman straight through here. You have been taken care of? No, right here. No, that's the one. The beard. Yep.
My question is about social group size and brain size, and in particular the tremendous size of our social groups right now. Is that causing an increase of brain development?
This gets back to the cesarean section question we had earlier.
Well, that's...
So wait, I got to paraphrase. So are you...
Not quite. Are we seeing, for one, are we seeing more schizophrenia, and for 2, do you expect to see even faster brain growth in the future?
So this is this question about, are we still evolving adaptively to our environment? And the new environment, of course, is this incredible sociality that we have in our urban centers. Over to you.
Well, yeah, that's certainly an extremely interesting question. The genetic evidence that we have, there was a paper that came out recently, Greg Cochran and some others showed that there has been a recent acceleration of positive selection in humans. So human population has gone up. That means there's more targets for adaptive mutation. Okay, the odds of getting good mutations are higher the bigger the population is, and they have evidence that this has actually gone on in, say, roughly the past 5,000 or 10,000 years in humans. Now, as far as the human brain actually getting bigger, the problem is that we're right at the limit of being able to squeeze that baby out, and we're right at the limit in terms of sort of energetic ability to sustain brain growth and sustain brain function. And I think that's part of the reason why psychosis tends to happen, so relatively easily to people, is we're sort of right near the edge of human abilities. So certainly yes, I think there's no reason to expect that natural selection has, by any sense stopped in humans, but it does take a very, very long time. Think about a good allele that's in a particular individual. Well, for that allele to spread throughout humans, everybody else on the earth and their descendants has to eventually die, right? And then that allele has to spread to everybody. So it takes a very, very long time for any sort of substantive change in frequency. So we really shouldn't hold our breath in terms of getting humans to be smarter.
We have to deal with what we've got. Yes, you were, I think, next.
Okay.
And then you.
I think I'm a little bit confused about the relationship of this autism to schizophrenia spectrum, that spectrum, and our evolutionary trajectory. Are you saying that we're kind of have moved from more underdeveloped traits, which would be more along the autism spectrum, towards the schizophrenia? And if that's the case, in evolution, are we trading off mechanistic intelligence for social intelligence?
Okay, good question. If I can try to paraphrase that. So, given the introduction of the ice cream cone and the layering, and this idea that there's a spectrum from autism and mechanistic thinking to schizophrenia and hypermentalistic thinking, can you think of the evolutionary trajectory as going from left to the right through time? And if so, are we trading off sort of mechanistic skills, logical skills, for these mentalistic skills?
There is evidence for trade-offs between visual spatial skills and verbal abilities from multiple studies. So especially if you adjust for IQ, there is evidence from multiple studies for negative correlations between those, which are suggestive of trade-offs in brain function that directly reflect that sort of continuum. Now, I've really presented some vast oversimplifications as regards especially autism, kind of in the interests of time. And I think it would be a considerable misrepresentation to say that autism represents something sort of specifically earlier in human evolution. Okay, there's really no reason to expect there to be any sort of precise matching between evolutionary history and the nature of the disorders that we have now. What we are looking at, more generally is the evolution of these social brain genes, and then when we lose social skills, we have this lack of social skills that we call autism, when it's a disorder. Okay, but in the vast majority of people, you have this diversity. Some people are good with verbal abilities. Some people are good with visual spatial abilities. If there's anything that humans do, they specialize. I mean, we all have specializations, and that really can't be something new. So humans are unusual in the degree to which specialization can really be an advantage. And that may have something to do with, autism, genes for autism being present and relatively common in humans, because those are genes for mechanistic skills, development of tools, development of technology. And it's technology that has transformed our world. It's not the verbal skills.
Okay. We have two more. So this lady here and the gentleman here. Yes.
Yeah, so back to the heritability thing. You were saying that some genes are on the spectrum of autistic to schizophrenic. So if you had a mother with one side and the father with the other side, would you end up having sort of an averaging out?
This is for next week, sexual selection. Choose your
I
partner.
hope so.
So this is back to the heritability. So if one of your parents was on one side of the spectrum and the other parent was on the other side of the spectrum, can you make a prediction about where the offspring would lie on that spectrum?
Yes, well, that is a very hard question. What I can say is that Baron Cohen has presented some ideas about, for example, the high incidence of autism that was reported in the Silicon Valley some years back. And he saw that as arising in part from assortative mating between people with high abilities in science and engineering. And this makes a lot of sense in sort of a population genetic perspective. Now, if one has autism and schizophrenia, which is due to effects of many genes, then in theory that sort of effect could happen. But there are so many different causes of each of them, and we know so little about how the genes interact with one another. I mean, that is the big black box in all of this work, is interactions between the effects of genes. It's very difficult to make any sort of predictions about that.
All right, and sir, you have that.
Yeah, I was wondering whether autistics or schizophrenics are predisposed to criminal behavior, and if they are, is it because they can't help themselves, or they're driven with their lack of social success?
So the question is: are people that are far from the normal on either side, are they more likely to be criminal, which I guess means antisocial in some sense? And is it because that they don't know better, or because they have lack of social success? Wow.
There is a perception of association between schizophrenia and violence. And there may be a little bit of statistical truth to that, but I think it's been blown well out of proportion, because when someone with schizophrenia commits a crime, it tends to be spectacular. It tends to be very unusual. It tends to be noticeable. It can involve, multiple people who they don't know being hurt, for example. So you get the establishment of that sort of, apparent connection in society. And there is evidence for some elevated criminality associated with schizophrenia, for example. But as far as autism, I haven't seen anything along those lines, specifically to the extent that people with autism do not have well-developed social skills and don't really understand their interaction with society. They should be relatively less likely to be held accountable in terms of the consequences of their social consequences of their actions. And of course, you could have opposite sorts of effects in terms of not understanding consequences in schizophrenia. Now, we're getting into morality, and we're going to have that in a couple weeks, I understand. So you'll have to wait.
Stay tuned.